Wonderful. Hopefully you can all see this screen now, and good morning again and welcome to the first Seismic Breakfast Briefing of 2023. Today we're going to be sharing some of our insights at Seismic about 2023 impact trends, and having a discussion about how as a business community we can leverage B Corp to navigate the year ahead. So for those who have joined us, we'd love to hear from you and spark some reflection as you think about 2023 for your organization. What are the main challenges that you feel you're facing in 2023? If you could put a short note in the chat, that would be wonderful. Give me a little moment to do that. Talent attraction and retention. Yeah, that's one we're seeing very commonly, particularly around impact and driving growth. Another one we've observed from speaking to different businesses is, costs rising, particularly around energy and facilities, raising funds. I don't know. Wonderful. Well, we'll keep that chat going. As these things come to mind, please do put them in the chat, and we can answer questions around them and share insights and discussion as we go. Material availability, really interesting. Okay, thank you. So as we dive in, for those who've not met yet, it's lovely to meet you. My name's Olivia. I'm a sustainability consultant at Seismic. Seismic are an international team of sustainability experts on a mission to help businesses prosper by becoming an increasingly impactful force for good. And we do that by bringing together experts in B Corp, net zero, and sustainability strategy to help lead the shift that we need in the business world from shareholder primacy towards stakeholder primacy. And for those who are less familiar with B Corp, it's most well known as a certification, but at Seismic we believe it's so much more than that. It's a framework for ESG strategy, a tool for continuous improvement, and help embed ongoing sustainable practices, whether you're starting or partway through your journey. And it really helps enable an inclusive economy, and overall is a movement for change. It's a means for us to come together and make that shift as a community. Here is a sample of clients that we have been very fortunate to have worked with at Seismic, to give you a sense of the different industries we've been working with, and feel very fortunate to be collaborating with. And it's lovely to have lots of our community in the call today. So thank you very much for joining us. With that, it gives me great pleasure to hand over to our Chief Community Officer and co-founder, Andy Schmidt, who's joining us from Germany. He has only 20 years experience in business and sustainability, and is going to be taking us through guidance today on our agenda, and then leading a conversation and discussion together with Katie Hill from B Lab. We're very, very glad to have you joining us, Katie. Over to you, Andy. I think you may be on mute.
Rookie mistake never fails. Thank you, Olivia, and good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us for our first breakfast briefing of 2023. And I think we had a bit of a tech issue, and I've learned that we've got some people that had registered by the previous link that are now making their way over here. So for those who are joining, welcome. We're just kind of getting started. Olivia asked if you want to put into the chat what are some of the key challenges your business, your organization are facing in the year ahead. So please do throw those in there, and we'll kind of use that to guide our conversation later with Katie Hill, who we're super happy to have joining us today to share her very unique experience on the challenges that businesses face in the year ahead and how B Corp can help your organization navigate those challenges. It is that time of year where there is a prediction around every corner on what to expect for the year ahead. And there is a lot of interesting research and reports that are being published right now. Over the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to share with you just a few observations that our team has collected and collated based upon numerous conversations we've had with corporate practitioners like yourselves in the last few months of last year. Those conversations come from our 100+ clients and our wider community that we engage through events like this and in-person events at the end of last year. And we spent a lot of time asking, what are you expecting from the year ahead? So our observations are going to point towards a few trends that we are seeing. But just for a little bit of context, this is by no means an exhaustive list or meant to be, because the challenges and the trends are vast that any organization is trying to navigate in 2023. Our hope is that you'll be able to walk away from here with one or two useful insights you can take back to your organization to help maintain the momentum of your ESG journey in the year ahead. Before I get into our observations that we wanted to share, just to briefly touch upon, because there is a lot of research being shared right now around the wider challenges business face. I'm just going to quickly touch upon that, but not go into it too much deeper, because I think Katie's going to share with us a bit more what she's seen and hearing from the macro level. So next slide, please, Olivia. This is just about those wider trends and challenges. This is from the World Economic Forum. Every year they publish, based on their research, the top 10 risks that businesses face, both in the near term and the longer term. And I think this just came out last week. So just looking at the top few or so here: cost of living crisis, extreme weather, armed conflict, climate change. Social and environmental risks are expected to have a significant impact on businesses in both the near term and the long term. Interestingly, though, how businesses can best mitigate those risks in both the near and the mid and long term is by understanding and improving the impact their business has on society and the environment, on people and planet. Next slide, please, Olivia. So the three trends or observations we have that we want to share with you: the convergence of corporate and ESG strategies, attracting and retaining talent becoming even increasingly important and challenging in the year ahead, and ESG budgets remaining flat for 2023. Next slide, please. And we can actually just skip ahead to the next one. So the convergence of corporate and ESG strategies. This is Forbes at the end of last year published their trends for business predictions for 2023. And in the statement on the left, predicting that sustainability will play a central role within business in the year ahead. And on the right, one data point from a bit of very recent research that was published by the UN Global Compact, where they surveyed over 2,600 CEOs, of which 98% agree that sustainability is core to their role. We imagine that 3 to 5 years ago, that data figure would have been considerably lower. Now, these are just a couple of indicators amongst countless others which are out there, but which absolutely align with a shift, might say a seismic shift, that we're beginning to see happening. Next slide, please. So this is, if you look back to 5 to 10 years ago, this is how strategies were typically formed. The company formed its business plan, strategy. Whoever was on point for sustainability, impact, ESG, they formed theirs. Sometimes they might have supported each other, but it was a fairly siloed process. And just to be realistic, 5 to 10 years ago, it was really the leaders who had actual ESG strategies in place. More often than not, this was just kind of a tactical plan of things that they were looking to tackle in the year ahead. Next slide, please. Now, the direction of travel over the last 3 to 5 years has been this. Corporate strategy is formed and a ESG strategy is formed, which cascades down from the business strategy in order to make sure that it's well aligned and supporting the objectives, the priorities of the business, which is great progress to see. But what's really exciting on the next slide is an emerging trend we're beginning to see more and more of. ESG strategy actually informing the corporate strategy, and then for the strategy of the organization to kind of be built around the ESG focus and priorities. In this emerging approach, a fully integrated approach to ESG, social and environmental performance is part of the day-to-day decision-making of the business, just like operational and financial performance factors currently are. And those ESG KPIs become integrated into things like company scorecards and reporting. Next slide, please. So how can B Corp help facilitate this direction of travel, this emerging trend? And it's really at the heart, I would say, at the B Corp framework and B Lab's approach to impact management. It helps organizations come up with concrete ways to integrate ESG into business strategy and just embed it into the everyday operations of the business. If you're familiar with the B Corp framework or B Corp certification process, you know the B Impact assessment, which is really the backbone of the B Corp approach to impact management currently. And organizations, as they go through the B Impact assessment, you can be recognized in a number of ways for putting in place mechanisms to really do that, embed ESG into business strategy. And just a few of them that we've called out here, for example, KPIs related to social and environmental performance. You get recognized in the B Corp framework for having those signed off by the board, and then progress against those reviewed by the board on a regular basis, just like you would other financial performance. And those ESG KPIs get integrated into key performance mechanisms like individual performance reviews, company scorecard, and even executive compensation. And then finally, there's a number of ways that a business gets recognized in the B Corp framework for having good practices around external transparency and accountability. One of which, importantly, is an annual impact report, which all B Corps are required to do. Great, thank you. Next slide, please. So moving on from our first observation and trend, this convergence of ESG and corporate strategy. Second one, which I think came up in one of the challenges from one of the organizations that you're facing this year, is recruiting and retaining talent is becoming both increasingly important and increasingly challenging. Next slide. So this is that UN Global Compact survey that I mentioned earlier. The competition for talent is going to be a key challenge, was reported by those over 2,000 CEOs. And the data point on the right, actually 70% of the CEOs surveyed indicate that talent scarcity is going to have a high or moderate impact on their business in 2023. Why behind this? I think from our perspective, what we're seeing and hearing is we're still on the heels of the Great Resignation, people changing roles, career path changes, wanting to change organizations during the COVID pandemic and lockdown, and that happening during a cost of living crisis, combined with the highest inflation we've seen in a generation. It means that running a business in general is more expensive. It means that staff need more in order to maintain their quality of life. And so it means that businesses are going to need to think about different ways, in addition to increasing salaries, to which there's limits in the current context, on how to engage their staff, retain good talent, and even attract new talent. Fortunately, we believe strongly that your ESG efforts, and especially leveraging the B Corp framework, going on a B Corp journey, might just be the solution that your organization needs. Next slide, please. So it's been, there's a number of benefits that B Corps often report on that they've realized from going on a B Corp journey, leveraging the B Corp framework. One of the top ones for sure is about attracting and retaining talent. This is one data point that from a B Corp community survey, that candidates that were interviewing amongst B Corp, over 70% of them mentioned that they were applying because the organization was a B Corp. And that just resonates with, I think, stories we've heard over the years that organizations, upon communicating to the market that they're on a B Corp journey, were able to significantly reduce their recruiting efforts because they suddenly had the best talent from their industry or other industries even knocking on the door. So if you feel that holding on to your talent or attracting good talent in the year ahead is going to a challenge for your business, leverage your ESG efforts. Make sure that you're communicating them both internally and externally very loudly. Next slide, please. And in addition to B Corp and ESG attracting and retaining talent, B Lab has, since its inception, just provided organizations a number of really valuable resources on how to support your people and your community and even your local economies. And they produce, in addition to the B Impact assessment, there is a number of different guides and resources that B Lab makes available. I think we're going to share some links to a few of these. This one here, B Lab UK came out with end of last year, which is just a really practical guide on how any organization can help their staff and their local community navigate this challenging time during a cost of living crisis with real tangible examples, ideas, inspiration that you can leverage. Next slide, please. And here, a couple of things to point out. Living wage. Living wage was a term I had never heard of until I began engaging with the B Corp framework a number of years ago. But it's this idea that, what governments set as legal minimum wages oftentimes don't actually hit the mark on what an individual or their family needs in order to have a decent quality of life. And B Lab has been advocating for a long time that companies using the B Corp framework or certified B Corps make sure they're paying all of their staff a living wage, and maybe even encourage their suppliers to pay their staff a living wage. So Living Wage Foundation is a great thing to look into, and the B Corp framework will help you make sure you're working towards that. A couple of years ago, B Lab came up with an inclusive economy challenge where they took a number of the key questions within the B Impact assessment that really help make sure that we have an inclusive economy and helps underserved communities and individuals get access to opportunity. And we think generally that, if companies were doing this, if more and more companies were doing these things and looking at living wage, maybe this cost of living crisis, the impacts wouldn't be as severe. And within that inclusive economy challenge, there's a number of best practice guides that B Lab created and made available, like growing a diverse workforce, engaging and retaining a diverse workforce, creating impact through purchasing. So encourage you all to have a look at those if you're trying to figure out how to support your staff and or your community in the year ahead. Next slide, please. And finally, our third observation is that ESG budgets are going to remain flat for 2023. Next slide. And that's absolutely amazing. Next slide, please. This is one bit of research of which we found a few reports at the end of last year This one is from a publication whose audience is finance directors. There was a survey done of over 600 CFOs, and the results were pretty consistent. 48% had planned at that time to increase investment in ESG in 2023 compared to 2022. 39% were planning to keep it flat. And this just, again, completely aligns with what we're hearing and seeing from the companies we work with and engage with, whether it's a large multinational or a small, medium enterprises, that although many companies, if not most companies, are having to make some really tough decisions right now, and oftentimes, unfortunately, make cuts across the board around resourcing, budgets, programs, and plans. But even in those instances, companies are typically leaving their ESG budgets flat for the year ahead compared to 2022. And this, we think, is an absolute seismic shift. If we were thinking back to 5 years ago, we're quite confident that those ESG budgets would have been one of the first items on the chopping block. And the fact that they remain untouched or even increasing slightly is a really fascinating development. Next slide, please. And so, yeah, those are just a few observations from our team on trends we're seeing for the year ahead. Again, given the multitude of challenges all organizations are facing, there are many, many more. This is not an exhaustive list by any means. I think the overarching message we want to share with you today is that despite it being one of the toughest business cycles that we've faced in our lifetime, a lot of indicators point towards ESG, sustainability, impact, continuing its direction of travel over the past 2 to 3 years, which has really been an accelerated trajectory of direction of travel, and becoming even more widely accepted as just a core critical business function. So our recommendation is therefore to try with all your might to hold on to the momentum you've built in 2022 around ESG. And for those of you who are just starting your journey, to also try not to park your plans for the year ahead, despite all of the challenges that your organization is facing. We recognize it can be tempting to feel like you need to lower your ambitions or park some planned initiatives while your business weathers the storm. But our concern is for our clients and our community is that given the indicators are pointing towards the majority of the market continuing to invest in measuring and improving social and environmental performance, those who are able to maintain that momentum will be in a much better position as we come out of this storm, whether that's 6, 9, 12 months or more from now. And those who choose to park or slow their ambition, you're then going to have to double or triple down on your efforts in order to catch up with your peers and your competitors. Thank you. That is enough from me. I would very much love to now welcome Katie Hill. Katie, thank you so much for joining us today. Paul, Amy, and I and the entire Seismic team are extremely grateful for you joining us, and couldn't think of a better way to kick off a new year. Also, I think, there was an announcement shared yesterday that Seismic is partnering with B Lab Europe to help accelerate the growth of the community by helping B Lab overcome a bit of a constraint, which is the result of the exponential interest in the B Corp framework and the B Corp certification that you and B Lab have seen over recent years. So that was just kind of serendipitous timing. So you joining here today, Katie, is very fitting. And we really, really appreciate you being here to share your experience with our community.
Thank you for having me. It's lovely to be here and to see just so many participants all early in the morning getting up to hear all your wise words, Andy. So I got a sense that you're largely, but not entirely, from the UK in all kinds of industries on different stages of your journey, but you've found the seismic magic to help you or to work with. So you're in good hands, and it's wonderful to just have this conversation and actually see in the chat some of the things that you're dealing with. So thank you for inviting me. I'm very grateful.
Well, thank you, Katie. And you are, currently, Kate, for those who aren't familiar with Katie's background, Katie is currently a board member of B Lab Global. B Lab is the standards body and the nonprofit organization behind the B Corp certification and community and framework. And Katie is also a policy advisor to B Lab Europe. And previously, Katie was CEO, Executive Director of B Lab Europe, and prior to that, Executive Director of B Lab UK, and really helped launch the community and the movement there back in 2015. So I can't think of anyone better or with a more unique perspective to think about what are the challenges businesses are facing, and how can this wonderful practical B Corp framework help them to navigate that. So Katie, maybe just to kick things off, in those hats that you wear within B Lab and in other engagements, again, I think you do have a quite a unique perspective on the macro environment. Could you just share from your perspective some of the macro environment challenges that you think businesses are going to be facing in the year ahead?
Thank you. Yes, Andy, I'd love to do that. And please do, others in the chat, share your thoughts too, because you're living and breathing it, and we're all feeling some of the experiences of today's business world in different ways. So very much a conversation. And yeah, I mean, I think Davos is going on at the moment, where the World Economic Forum has set out their kind of agenda, and each year it feels as though they're having to kind of rewrite the plot really of what it is we're trying to do. And when you looked at Andy's slide with the list of things that are kind of on the up to 2 year horizon and what's on the 10-year horizon, there's some reconfiguring of the order, but they can look overwhelming. And I just would like to remind everyone, some of you might not remember, but there was an ozone crisis, a hole in the ozone, which was really causing huge problems. And acid rain was a big issue. This is back in the 80s, 90s. And we managed, it was a simpler problem, I agree, than entire climate change. But we have, it seems, the scientists are saying that because of our reduction of the CFCs and other products and habits that the humans had developed, which were, causing the problem, the ozone layer, the ozone hole is now actually looking on track to be closed up. So we've done things like this before. We have actually sort of repaired our planet when we've needed to. So, hold on to the hope. And I do think one of the big, and I loved, Andy, all your messages. And I think the thing at the back of all of this is that we've just all got to be so open to change and to thinking about how to do things differently, because clearly it's about a mindset and about human effort and about collaboration that will overcome some of these, what look like really daunting challenges, I think, otherwise. And you mentioned a number of them in the way. I think, just to pick out a couple of, or a few things that I think are really driving things. Clearly, the world is obviously so in a state of very great uncertainty around the environment and what can each business actually do about it. And I think people are sort of rushing to say, well, regulation has to be the answer, and we need to regulate in many, many ways. And clearly regulation is part of the change we need in order to ensure that businesses really step up and play the role that they can play. But it's not enough just to sort of throw this obligation on them and not really ensure that they have the tools and really the feeling of power and influence to do it. So this is where I think being part of a community, and in this case it's a really global community in the B Corp movement, 6,500 companies all over the world, can make a real difference to looking at things differently and keeping that open-mindedness about how it is that my part in a supply chain can be part of a bigger part of a supply chain that can make a real difference to some of the real challenges that we have. And a lovely example, I think, I quote this one because it was one of the early ones we did, was with Ella's Kitchen, which is a relatively, I mean, it's a very sort of well-established brand, but it's not a huge company. But they went to all of their suppliers and everybody they worked with and said, we're going to do this at a sort of chain level. We're going to actually introduce these different ways of working and our different approach and our requirements for you to have a supply chain that's as really meaningful as possible in every aspect in all our different parts of the supply chain. And many of them have become B Corps. But that in a way wasn't the point. The point was to say we're not an isolated entity, just the distributor at the end or the retail outlet at the end is not an isolated entity. We're part of something much, much bigger. And now with supply chains all across the world being in this really confusing state, with China particularly having this on-off or sort of out of the market and now back in the market in a rather kind of binary way, it's creating huge sorts of issues for products and supplies. I think one of you mentioned it. I think yes, on the material, Karen, you mentioned material availability, and so what is it that we can be doing to address that? And I think it is about building much greater understanding of how our suppliers are really struggling and what is going on at their end that makes a difference, and what are alternatives that we can think about. I think the role of business and what it is that we're here to do seems to be continuously being thought through. And you might have seen yesterday, I think it was, or last week, Edelman produced their latest kind of trust barometer. I think there's a lot of uncertainty about this. Whether is trust the same as expectations? What are we really measuring? Because other indicators seem to suggest that business still is struggling to really get the confidence of people. But whatever it is, there is no doubt if you are looking seriously at your environmental and your social and your governance impact, you will be in a different league to the broader view of business that is still extractive and still dominated by profit. So this kind of differentiator, which we hope and see has been coming more and more mainstream, is a really important part of just building hope and certainty for our for the world that we can create. And I think increasingly we're seeing that that's being built into regulations. So I was going to mention also, I think on here, changing ESG reporting standards, which is going to be a key thing. And again, those of you who are operating internationally, you will have to juggle and manage a number of different standards, and we can dig into that in a minute. But just to say that I think certainly in this side of the world, and I think it's happening in others as well, there is a recognition that we have to look at the role of business. If we're going to create this green economy, we do have to think about the role of business completely differently, and we will need to both introduce policies and regulations to ensure that we support that. And I think that's one of the problems we have, is the information and the evidence that this is a better way of working is still thin on the ground, and it's still therefore difficult. And at the moment, I'm involved in a lobbying activity around the EU directive on corporate governance. And we're trying to push hard to say that directors should have this overarching responsibility for the impact that their business makes on all the different stakeholders. And we're really struggling that member states just don't buy this argument. They're really worried about competition from China. They see that regulation will make more cost, and they don't see the benefit. And where we really need evidence to say this is why it's good. And by the way, just in case, I know you are worried about growth, I see that on there, but last year we did the analysis of what are the growth rates of B Corps who've been certified for 3 years from 2018 up to 2021, and the average growth rate was 30%, which is crazy high compared to what's going on in the world. And I don't expect that that's going to continue, because if you actually take in inflation and things we're going to be measuring, we have to sort of make that into a real a value, rather than a sort of nominal, but a real inflation rate, growth rate to counter for inflation. But what I think it's showing is that good businesses, even in really difficult times, are finding that they have this opportunity. And therefore, this is the sort of evidence that can then persuade the member states and other interested parties that this isn't going to be a cost that doesn't produce any benefit, but it is actually a future way of doing business. So a plea to all of you would be to think about how you can help us provide that evidence base, because it's key to winning any debate about what policy should be in place. And then I think the third one was also just about the role of consumers. I think there's a changing role about what do we think of consumers. And the wonderful gentleman called John Alexander, who runs a B Corp here in the UK, has written a book called Citizens. And he really looks at how businesses could be much more kind of imaginative in a way about how they think about their relationship with consumers, and moves away from this idea of buying and the sort of consumption lens, but thinks about how they can co-create solutions, especially and almost uniquely now, while we're in this position of what is it that we can't produce because we don't have the supply, or we can't afford the cost of living costs to make new products. So again, I think just opening up that whole lens and thinking about what it is that could be done differently. Working with consumers can make a real difference. There are many other things going on. The tech industry, as you know, is all sorts of changes that I think are finally coming down the line in the legislative role of the tech industry, which will be fundamental, not just to businesses but to citizens, which I think is really exciting. I think just yesterday we saw in the UK is likely to now be increasingly responsibility for directors who are producing or allowing material online that shouldn't be on there, that is really a very hostile focus, to be now criminal liability for directors. So I think that is changing. It's been slow, but I think also businesses have a real role to play in changing that debate on how we use tech platforms to really ensure we don't greenwash, we don't dumb down what it is we're trying to do, but we use that platform to really create the community around us. Lots more we could say, but I'll stop there just for a minute, Andy, sorry, and let you jump in.
No, thank you, Katie. It was, as expected, but really good indication of just the breadth of challenges that organizations need to be aware of and thinking about. Definitely a dynamic year ahead for sure. Maybe just one comment on, to your great point, Katie, the community, and that we have access to this community of the B Corp community, and it's been you hear it many times. One of the reasons that organizations choose the B Corp framework is that sense of community. And actually, I just want to, for those of us joining here today as part of the Seismic community, we love to bring to our clients and our wider ecosystem wonderful speakers like Katie to share knowledge and experience, but we also like for you to share with each other. So when we open it up in a bit, if anyone has anything they want to specifically share, a good practice, a learning, a challenge you're facing. And also, I think our favorite part is when people join engagements like this and then start connecting and collaborating with each other and take it offline and go and help each other accelerate their sustainability journeys. So please, just to encourage that. Katie, of all of those different challenges that and just developments that we all need to be thinking about and understanding and figuring out how to manage and progress and navigate, any thoughts around how the B Corp framework, the B impact assessment, the certification process, or all of those other wonderful resources that B Lab creates and makes available can be leveraged to navigate these myriad of challenges?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and very much this is crowdsourced information. I mean, B Lab might be the people who put it together, but I think it's only because of the power of the companies that we have anything to say and are drawing on those. So just to make sure that it's really clear that this is very much information and experience from working with real leading companies. I mean, I think we think about the SDGs. I think we're now 8 years away. We did produce a SDG action Action Manager, which is a very useful tool, I think, particularly for companies that are beginning this discussion maybe with their board or their senior executives about kind of, why do I need to do this? What is it connecting to? I do still believe that the SDGs, although they have, I think, they sort of ebb and flow in terms of popularity and in terms of kind of tangible benefit, but I think what the SDG Action Manager does is it takes, if you're already going through the assessment of the B impact assessment, it actually helps you to then put those goals and those metrics and those behaviors into a framework which matches them up against the SDGs. So you can start to talk a language which is perhaps a bit more familiar to individuals who are kind of connected but not maybe in the deep into the weeds of the ESG, and to help to really understand what that gives you as a sort of focus as a company, because there's 17 goals. Which one we are really materially contributing to, and which ones do we really just say that isn't what we can do, but let's home in on this? And I think now, I don't know if you would agree with this, but I think leadership is going through a huge rethink. I mean, we used to have this idea of, you know, the good old pinnacle and triangle and the person at the top with all the answers, and I think we've all realized that is a fatally flawed way of thinking about leadership. But actually thinking about leaders per se in so many areas, if whether it's in developing a project or thinking about a strategy or wondering how to create partnerships, is leaders are all over our organizations. And one of the interesting pieces of work I think that's been done is to take the SDGs and say, what kind of qualities do we need in people who are going to actually be able to influence us in achieving these goals? And they're called the inner development goals. And I've just started to have a look at these and get into them. And it's a really lovely piece of work about human qualities, about what it is that's really needed if we're, you know, going to be able to encourage people to come and work with us, to keep people working with us, to really protect the precious human talent that sits in organizations. So I'd recommend it's worth having a look and thinking about what in my organization am I doing that would help both attract and retain the talent we have, but also then help us really think about achieving our bigger goals and work on programs that help that. One of the most important inner development goals that has been identified is the ability to co-create. And so back to this, I think, again, the B Corp movement and anyone in this world, in this sort of ESG impact focused world, is up for collaboration, is up for co-creation. And we see this happening more and more even in competitive markets. So there's created a B Corp Beauty Coalition, which is all the companies in any company that's in the beauty or cosmetics industry and certifies as a B Corp across the globe can join this beauty coalition. So last year we started it with 6 B Corps. It's now got 52, and they're looking at 3 specific things. They're looking at actually responsible sourcing. They're looking at green packaging. And I've forgotten the third, but it is something related to the, oh, I know, it's about kind of industrial kind of issues, which are more around kind of, it's a very chemically based industry with not much regulation. So they're looking at what they can do about some of the waste issues. And so they're all potentially competitors, but actually they've all come together and said, let's look at this sort of problem together and see if we can change the beauty industry for good in a way that directs it. And there's some big players in there, you know, the Body Shop and Natura as well, but many, many more niche, smaller companies who are really learning and contributing as well to the whole debate. So I think I would really recommend having another look at that. The Beauty Coalition is on the website. It's easy, B Corp Beauty Coalition, you can have a look at, but just to see whether there's a way that could be potentially interesting for your industry, if there's things that you're working with. And I think there are many, many groups already set up from different impact-led businesses and B Corps to help create that. Maybe one other tool I could, I mean, there are so many to mention, but I think another one I'm quite excited about is, I don't know what you feel about boardrooms, but I feel boardrooms need a bit of a shake-up. I think sometimes boards are struggling to kind of really navigate, and it's a difficult role, I think, for board directors to play. They have this fiduciary duty, but they also need to have a real understanding of the business to be able to contribute strategically and meaningfully, and they have a supportive role. And these can be played in so many different ways. But whose voice is around the table? How are we thinking about not just the here and now, but the long term? And this goes back to the regulatory issues about how businesses should be governed and corporate governance. But one sort of offshoot of the B Corp movement is a toolkit called Boardroom 2030, which actually was presented at COP26 in Glasgow. The Body Shop did a kind of Boardroom 2030 experiment, and of course the voice of younger people was a very large feature of it, but it was also just about expressing and thinking in the longer term. So this year is difficult. Andy's presentation made it clear this is a tough year, but this isn't the only year we're going to have. We are going to see changes. So thinking about how boards can be really well informed and make the decisions that have enough knowledge and understanding of what the businesses are going through, to be really powerful agents for change. So yeah, and then just one more thing would be student research. Students are always looking, well, in my experience, we have huge numbers of students who are always writing in saying, can we do some research? What can we look at? Could we be involved with you? If that's a chance that you have issues maybe in your industry or in your supply chain that you think could be something you would love to have someone really dig into and look at, but you don't have the bandwidth, it's a beautiful way of getting a third party, an outside view. You may not need a full professorial academic approach to start with. You might just need someone to do some legwork and groundwork to understand where the issues are. And it's a beautiful way of engaging the students in businesses. We've had so many students who then become interns, who then become unbelievable, real sort of pillars of the community. So think about how we can use those as well. Maybe I'll stop there just to allow time for people to jump in and speak.
Yeah, wonderful, Katie. Love all of the concrete examples and resources, and we've shared them out with everyone. And really, this common theme of, doing more together, whether that's an industry coalition or with your suppliers. Remind me of in your example of Ella's Kitchen, and remind me of B Lab Europe did a bit of work with Patagonia, a client of ours, where we kind of collectively help Patagonia take a small portion of the B impact assessment and then engage their suppliers, especially their retail partners, to kind of support them and bring them on a journey. So I think, the B Corp framework is obviously there for certification, but there's so much innovative ways you can use it, flexible ways you can use it to engage your stakeholders. I think we're just kind of really scratching the surface of that. There's a lot more ways businesses can use it. So you're absolutely right. Would also love to just open it up to any questions or comments from our participants here. And maybe Olivia, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, so we're going to stop recording now, because at this stage of our breakfast briefings, we want to open up the discussion